What's going on, guys? Dare here with Fantasy Football Advice, coming at you with another fantasy football video. Today, we got a good one for you guys. In today's video, we're going to be going over 4 wide receivers that are being drafted in the middle to later rounds, but these wide receivers may be classified by most to be a bit more of a risky pick, and considering that these players are coming off the board in the middle rounds where most people are still putting together their starting rosters, some people may be avoiding them, and as a result, I'm seeing them drop in fantasy drafts. My goal in this video is to just let you guys know not to be too afraid of risk, especially at the wide receiver position this season. As we know, the wide receiver position has so much depth. Each and every season, we're seeing more and more fantasy relevant wide receivers, and because of that, our risk appetite can involve drafting some of these riskier wide receivers so long as the upside makes up for it. Before we do get into the video though, just a quick shout out and reminder that if you do enjoy these videos, if you enjoy the content we're putting out, show your support by hitting that like button. It only takes a moment for you, but greatly helps us out in growing the channel. Some of you may be aware, but we are on the road to 100k subscribers, and our goal is to reach that by the start of the NFL season. With your help, we can definitely make that happen. So if you enjoy the content, hit that like button, and if you're new to the channel, watch our content but maybe you're not yet subscribed, consider hitting that subscribe button today. Also, guys, our draft packages, they are available now. If you're waiting for us to break down a player but maybe we haven't hit on that player yet, fear not, you can access that information at our website. There you gain access to our tier-based rankings, including all of our sleepers, targets, our busts. We have video player breakdowns on all draftable players, risk ratings, access to our private Discord community, and more. So if that's something that interests you, once again, you can access that at our website, thefantasyfootballadvice.com. Link, as always, in the description box below. With all that out of the way, it's time to go over to our stat of the day. Yesterday's stat of the day: who was the only running back last season, age 27 or older, to average at least 5 yards per carry on over 100 rushing attempts? The correct answer was actually Raheem Mostert. Congratulations to Connor McLeod, who was the first to get this right on YouTube, and as for Twitter, at JulianPD19. Once again, congratulations to both of you. But as for today's stat of the day, 2 tight ends last season had a passing attempt. Travis Kelce actually led the way with 2 pass attempts, but who is the only other tight end in 2020 to finish the season with a pass attempt? Leave your answer in the comment section down below. We'll be happy to let you know who wins in tomorrow's video. Without further ado though, let's hop right into the video, and as per usual, we'll begin with the player listed on the thumbnail. That player is Jerry Jeudy of the Denver Broncos. Jerry Jeudy is going to be one of those types of players where, depending on the person that you're asking about, the outlook for him and how he produced in the 2020 season is going to depend on which person you're asking. Some people would classify his rookie season as successful. He did get a lot of volume, coming in with 113 targets, but a lot of people will also be quick to bring up that he had a lot of things working in his favor last season. Admittedly, it would have been very difficult for Jerry Jeudy to command 113 targets, a mark that would have him ranking just outside the top 20, 21 to be specific, but it would have been very difficult for him to reach those numbers had Courtland Sutton not been injured in the first week of the season. On top of that, it did feel as though Jerry Jeudy may not have been 100% ready to play an alpha wide receiver 1 role for any offense in the NFL. Despite finishing the season 21st in targets, Jerry Jeudy ended up ranking 51st when it came to receptions, 2nd when it came to unrealized air yards, meaning the team was often looking for him on deeper passing plays, many of them obviously not connecting, and with him finishing his rookie season with 8 total drop passes, it's safe to say that Jerry Jeudy's rookie season could have been astronomical, but ultimately I believe most of us would summarize it as a disappointment. Jerry Jeudy, despite playing in all 16 games, finished as the wide receiver 46. He did that via 52 receptions, 856 receiving yards to go along with 3 receiving touchdowns. As it stands today, Courtland Sutton is slated to return in this offense week 1 fully healthy, and if that does happen, it does call into question what type of target market share are we expecting for Jerry Jeudy. And while we are fully on board with the fact that Courtland Sutton will return as the lead option in this passing game from the wide receiver position, I do fully expect that this could be something that actually helps Jerry Jeudy become much more efficient. Like I had mentioned earlier, I do believe Jerry Jeudy and the lack of success he had was a combination of a few things. One of those factors just being that he was thrust into a role that he might not have been ready for. This was a team with subpar quarterback play. A new running back in this offense hadn't yet built up trust with the quarterback and coaching staff. So even though Jerry Jeudy was put into a position that had a lot of opportunity, a lot of upside, it's a tall order for any rookie wide receiver to come into an offense that's not yet established and to just be an anchor for them. And long story short, I'm simply not going to use that as a reason not to draft him. Jerry Jeudy is currently coming off the board as the wide receiver 36. So for most people, he is going to be that wide receiver 4, that flex type receiver for your fantasy team. And because he is going to be drafted as a borderline starter, a lot of people are afraid to draft him because it's a higher draft spot than where he finished last season, coupled with the fact that Courtland Sutton is now returning. I personally believe that having Courtland Sutton in this offense is something that could greatly help Jerry Jeudy and his developmental process. The fact that the Broncos actually have 2 quarterbacks competing for the starting job is also benefiting all the receivers in this offense. And when it comes to a player like Jerry Jeudy and how they intend to use him, he's actually not even the type of player to require a high amount of volume in order to produce for fantasy. If we take a look at the areas where Jerry Jeudy struggled in last season, areas like contested catch rate, areas like drops, those types of struggles are definitely going to impact the receiver who's going to be the first read in the offense, leaving Jerry Jeudy to play more of an outside role, to play the deep target role, something they greatly tried to get him involved in last season, as seen by his ranking of 2nd in unrealized air yards, 7th in total deep passing targets. This is an area that's a strength of Jerry Jeudy. He finished last season ranking 11th in yards per reception, so as long as he was actually hit by the quarterback, Jerry Jeudy was able to do a lot with the ball. Unfortunately for him, connecting him to the football was a tall task. Despite finishing the season 6th in air yards, 11th in yards per reception, Jerry Jeudy actually finished outside the top 70 in yards per target, and with Jerry Jeudy no longer being the featured weapon in this passing game, that opens up a lot more opportunities to see a lighter defense against him. Courtland Sutton will be facing the top coverage by opposing defenses, leaving Jerry Jeudy to be more open than he was last season. If Jerry Jeudy is able to clean up some of those drops, as I remind you, he had 8 last season, then we can definitely see the efficiency numbers for Jerry Jeudy skyrocket when compared to last season. What Jerry Jeudy was able to do on 52 receptions should not be understated. There in no way needs to be 113 targets to get Jerry Jeudy to 52 receptions. In fact, if the quarterback play for the Denver Broncos can just upgrade to somewhere near league average, then Jerry Jeudy wouldn't need anywhere near 113 targets to reach those same reception totals. We can't stress enough how poor the quarterback play is, and assuming if Teddy Bridgewater actually gets the nod and the start, looking at his numbers when compared to Drew Lock's last season, they are night and day different. Believe it or not, Teddy Bridgewater actually ranked 1st in accuracy when it comes to his passes. Compare that to Drew Lock, who, despite being a starter, ranked outside the top 32, coming in 33rd in that metric. And we know Bridgewater had absolutely no difficulty spreading the ball around. He was very strong in the deep passing game as well as intermediate passing game, 2 levels where Jerry Jeudy will be very much involved. And after last season, with Curtis Samuel, DJ Moore, and Robbie Anderson all each able to finish inside the top 25 at the wide receiver position, we should not be worried whatsoever with Jerry Jeudy's ability to finish as a top 25 receiver. I feel very strongly about the Denver Broncos offense taking a massive step forward in the 2021 season. So if I'm going to capitalize on that by getting players on this Denver Broncos team onto my fantasy roster, I'm going to do that by targeting the cheapest weapon that's going to be the most involved in this offense, and that player is Jerry Jeudy. Alright guys, it's time to move into the next wide receiver, and the next wide receiver we have on this list is probably the most polarizing in the entire draft. The player I'm talking about, of course, is Ja'Marr Chase of the Cincinnati Bengals. The reason I say that he is one of the most polarizing picks is because this is a rookie drafted to a team with a quarterback coming off of a torn ACL, joining a team with an offense that is completely loaded at the wide receiver position, led by receivers like Tyler Boyd and T. Higgins, just drafted a year ago. Oh yeah, and did I mention this wide receiver hasn't seen a snap of football since the 2019 season. He opted to sit out for the 2020 season, already locking in and securing his high draft capital in the upcoming NFL draft. And if that wasn't crazy enough, this wide receiver is currently coming off the board as the wide receiver 20. So to summarize, we haven't seen this player on the field since 2019 playing at a college level. Now he joins a team that has a quarterback coming off of a torn ACL. On top of that, he joins an extremely deep wide receiving room. And in order to get him on your fantasy team, you're going to have to invest a top 20 pick at the wide receiver position. Clearly, these are unprecedented terms for any wide receiver we've seen coming out of college into the NFL. For that, Ja'Marr Chase is simply going to be a player that's straight up off of fantasy radars for many people drafting, taking an approach in the early rounds to just avoid risk in any way possible, and I could see how crossing off Ja'Marr Chase as a potential draft candidate inside the top 20 at the wide receiver position is one way people can guarantee to avoid some risk in the early rounds. Like I had mentioned in the beginning of this video though, I think this season we should be handling the wide receiver position a bit differently. I can see this as a season where we are opting to draft wide receivers that do bring in a bit more risk than we typically would like, so long as the upside, like I had mentioned earlier, does make up for it. When it comes to Ja'Marr Chase and upside, those are are two words that go hand in hand. This is a wide receiver coming out of the draft with unprecedented levels of hype around him. How many other wide receivers could skip out on their entire senior season and still end up getting drafted as the 5th overall player taken off the board? This is also a player who's most comparable to Odell Beckham, who we all know had one of the most dominant rookie seasons we've ever seen. Athletically, it's hard to find anybody that matches Ja'Marr Chase. He stands at 6 foot, 201 pounds. He runs a 4.39 40-yard dash time, coming in at the 95th percentile. He actually ran a 4.34 on his pro day, but it doesn't end there. We're talking 86th percentile speed score, 97th percentile burst score, 82nd percentile agility score, and 94th percentile catch radius. Even though Ja'Marr Chase is most comparable to Odell Beckham, who has a very similar size and stature, even when comparing Odell Beckham's 40-yard dash time, his speed score, his burst score, all of these metrics, Ja'Marr Chase actually edges out Odell Beckham in. The fact that Ja'Marr Chase actually took a year off of football, so long as his body's been kept in good shape and the offseason program that the Cincinnati Bengals do deploy isn't too taxing on his body and they get him up to speed slow, I actually can see him taking off the 2020 season as a positive as opposed to a negative. His legs will undoubtedly be the freshest on the entire team, although he is joining the Cincinnati Bengals offense and they do have a deep wide receiver room. One thing we have to keep in mind is why the Bengals targeted him in the first place. He already has a pre-established chemistry and connection to quarterback Joe Burrow. It would be completely crazy to consider drafting a wide receiver, a rookie, in the top 20 with the level of talent ahead of him that the Cincinnati Bengals have in their offense. But considering that Ja'Marr Chase has a massive edge when it comes to chemistry and connection, in fact, his edge is actually greater than that of the receivers already on this offense. Ja'Marr Chase's insane 2019 campaign where he had 11. Ja'Marr Chase's insane 2019 campaign where he boasted 111 targets, 84 receptions, nearly 1,800 receiving yards, and over 20 touchdowns. That was with Joe Burrow throwing him the ball. Now, Joe Burrow didn't even play a full season for the Cincinnati Bengals, and back in 2018, that was Joe Burrow's first season on LSU. Also, the first season Ja'Marr Chase was on LSU, they were developing together as a unit. Ja'Marr Chase may be coming into this season as a rookie, but due to building that chemistry with Joe Burrow in his college career, not receiving a pass from any other quarterback except for Joe Burrow back in 2019, he will look to pick up exactly where he left off for 2021. And if it's anything like we saw that combination do at the NCAA level in 2019, Ja'Marr Chase is going to absolutely smash his current ADP at the wide receiver 20. Alright guys, we're moving into the next player, the third player on this list, and it is going to be a wide receiver who you already know that we are fans about, but he's not a player that has graced many videos. The player we're talking about is Cooper Kupp of the LA Rams, and he's currently coming off the board as the wide receiver 22. We've been very vocal throughout this entire offseason about being very high on the LA Rams offense as a whole, and that means we're trying to get any piece we can of this offense as long as they're one of the main contributors. When looking for contributors in the LA Rams offense, it's hard to look any further than Cooper Kupp, who's actually coming in at a pretty good discount this season. Like I had mentioned, he's coming off the board as the wide receiver 22. This is largely on the back of a down season that he faced in 2020. Cooper Kupp, despite appearing in 15 games and receiving 124 targets, the second highest of his career, he did disappoint from a results standpoint, finishing as the wide receiver 26 in a PPR league that was on the back of 92 receptions, 974 receiving yards, and a mere 3 receiving touchdowns. A wide receiver 26 finish may not be disappointing for many receivers in the league, but Cooper Kupp coming off of a top 5 season in 2019, a season in which he only had 94 receptions, to see in 2020 that Cooper Kupp had 92 receptions, 2 fewer than he had the season before, but instead of a wide receiver 5 finish like we saw in 2019, he dropped all the way down outside the top 25. Fantasy drafters should rejoice in seeing that you're getting such a massive draft day discount on him, and even though he did play in 15 games, only missing 1 game, one thing we know about his 2020 season was that he was battling injuries. A fully healthy Cooper Kupp certainly could have done a lot more than he did last season, and heading into the 2021 season, all signs are reporting Cooper Kupp is completely healthy. The quarterback situation may have changed, moving from Jared Goff to Matthew Stafford, and while a new quarterback does bring in a certain level of risk to an offense, when it comes to Cooper Kupp and the other receivers in this offense, we should in no way fear the role of Cooper Kupp. Cooper Kupp is one of the most talented wide receivers in the league. The level of talent and depth behind Robert Woods and Cooper Kupp is pretty thin. The offense itself has a complete target funnel to the wide receivers, and just because the quarterback is switching from Jared Goff to Matthew Stafford, it doesn't mean that the talent level of the wide receivers in this offense has changed one bit. Cooper Kupp is still slated to be the most talented receiver in this offense, clearly the one with the most upside when compared to even Robert Woods, so expecting anything other than Matthew Stafford being an upgrade for Cooper Kupp would really be a head-scratching take. If I'm heading into the draft and seeking the highest upside possible for receivers in this range, then it's undeniable Cooper Kupp is going to be one of the top on my list. He's one of the few wide receivers that you can draft in the back-end wide receiver 2 range that easily and hands down has top 5 upside that nearly nobody could argue. Cooper Kupp is a phenomenal player to be drafting in that range. I know a lot of us out there, including myself, are after drafting Robert Woods if possible. I know typically when I'm looking for a wide receiver 2, I want a player that I can count on their production week in and week out. And while we're not going to necessarily have that for Cooper Kupp, I strongly believe he'll more than make up from it from a season-long standpoint. And if I'm in the fantasy playoffs in a vacuum, if I'm choosing between Robert Woods or Cooper Kupp, I'm not gonna lie, I would rather have Cooper Kupp. Alright guys, we're moving into our final wide receiver in today's video. And this is another player I don't think we've had the luxury of talking about yet, but we want to let you guys know this is still a very strong player to target. It's DeVonta Smith of the Philadelphia Eagles. Currently, DeVonta Smith is being drafted outside the top 30 wide receivers and falling. He's currently coming off the board as the wide receiver 33. And while that may seem like a lot to give up for a Philadelphia Eagles wide receiver, a team that had really nobody that was consistently putting up starter level production, now they have a new quarterback, Jalen Hurts, who's hardly completing over 50% of his passes. I can see for those reasons why the wide receiver 33 may be a bit too high of a price tag for many people. One thing I want you to keep in mind though is that DeVonta Smith is going to be the team's leading receiver, the top targeted receiver in this offense, and I have little to no doubt of that. Last season, this team did everything possible to put up every wide receiver on the roster and on the practice squad onto the field to see if anybody could possibly get something going. Travis Fulgham did his best to fill that role, but it was clear that the Philadelphia Eagles needed to make drastic changes at the wide receiver position, and they made splashes in the NFL draft by taking DeVonta Smith with the 10th overall pick. Now, when it comes to DeVonta Smith, this is definitely a player that can play that alpha wide receiver 1 role. I will admit he does have a bit smaller of a frame, 6 foot 170, but don't let that be a reason to underestimate his abilities on the field. DeVonta Smith was an absolute stud at Alabama. He finished the season with 117 receptions, 1,856 receiving yards to go along with 23 receiving touchdowns. That is massive considering he only played in 13 games. That was largely on the back of his second half season explosion, where he was averaging 9 receptions for 163 receiving yards and nearly averaging 2.5 touchdowns per game. 200 receiving yards and 3 receiving touchdowns in any game throughout the 2020 season was just something you could expect from DeVonta Smith. So heading into the Philadelphia Eagles offense, a team desperate for playmakers, DeVonta Smith is going to be in a prime position to be a week 1 contributor. That said, it's not to say that this pick doesn't come without its certain level of risk. Rookie wide receivers inherently are a bit more inconsistent, and if we're coupling that risk factor with Jalen Hurts and the risk of his production at quarterback, then DeVonta Smith is a player that could definitely bust, but then again, he is being drafted outside the top 30 wide receivers. Currently, he's being drafted 2 spots behind DJ Chark, 2 spots ahead of Deebo Samuel, so when you're comparing him to other risky wide receivers in that range, I think DeVonta Smith is one of the safer wide receivers out of this risky range. And when it comes to upside, let's say Jalen Hurts doesn't disappoint us and he actually comes out and takes a step forward from a passing perspective. I'm not saying Josh Allen levels of progression, but if he's able to put up numbers similarly to league average, DeVonta Smith as the leading receiver in this offense could easily and right out of the gate have top 20 upside. For a player that's currently being drafted as a wide receiver 3/wide receiver 4, I think that's a very small price to pay. And when you're measuring the risk to potential upside that he brings to the table, I think it's a no-brainer pick because the upside more than makes up for the risk he brings to your roster. But guys, that's going to do it for this video. We really hoped you enjoyed. If you did, how about hitting that like button? If you're new to the channel, please hit that subscribe button. We thank you all for watching, and we'll catch you on the next one.